So thank you very much. I'm going to demonstrate a prototype developed for my PhD work with a title called Consistency Checking of Runtime Feature Dependencies in Software Product Lines. Basically in my PhD I propose a model for identifying a consistency and performing consistency checking of runtime feature dependencies. The assets, the product line assets that I am checking or verifying are the implementations of runtime feature dependencies versus its specification. So what I have essentially proposed is a process model, and there are four main processes. I'm going to briefly go through. One is called code to implementation model transformation. The second is called specify runtime feature dependencies, and as a part of second process it says integrate the DOFM and the IM. What is DOFM and what is IM I'm going to discuss later on. And the third process is called aspect oriented pattern detection, and so the source code. So these two processes are basically working with the source code, and the fourth one is applying the epsilon validation constraints. So these are like OCL constraints, and it will give error markers as a feedback to the product line engineer. So essentially these are the four main processes. Now it comes to the terminology that I've used: DOFM, IM, and PM. These are the interrelated languages that I have developed and designed to provide a model-driven solution. So the plugin that I'm going to discuss further on for the rest of the demo is working with the language that I have designed and developed in the modeling language called modeling framework called Eclipse modeling framework. Now I'm going to start, and I'm going to discuss that I have actually developed a plugin called Code to Model plugin. What essentially is doing is automating the processes of the proposed model first, which is code to implementation model transformation, and the aspect oriented pattern detection, the source code. So what it is essentially doing is it's performing the pattern detection the source code, and it is at the same time it is generating the implementation model, which is a kind of abstract view to the implementation, like the project contains packages and the rest of that. I'm going to demonstrate in a second. Now it is, like I said, it is automating the first process and the third process of the proposed model. So let me remind you that the second process and the fourth processes are manually done by the product line engineer. So I'm going to start demonstrating my prototype in a second. So this is our development environment, and I'm going to rerun that. So now if I go here, I'm going to run that, and it takes a bit of time, but now we are in the runtime environment, and the project that I'm going to use for the demo is called aspect oriented program dependency demo.implementation. So if you see here, the project contains three packages. One is called base package, which is just a main class. One is called dependencies, which contains the dependencies. These are essentially the dependencies that are being taken by the work by Professor Kwan Woolley from Hanyang University, dealing with they have prescribed modular implementation of the runtime feature dependencies by utilizing the aspect-oriented programming paradigm. So just to give you an example, one is the prescribed pattern is required activation. So what essentially it does is that if two features are present, then let's say S1 and S2, then these two features are present in the final product. Then if S2 is present, then it requires S1 to be activated. So this is kind of required activation behavior, and these are the realization, or you can say these are the implementations. So for instance, before that, I'm going to, because there is a package called features, which contains the features, dummy features called M1, M2, M3, M4, M5, and base FM. Now I come back to the one. So now here M1 required activation M2. What essentially is saying is that if M1 and M2 are present, and if M2 is being activated, then it requires M1 to be activated during the runtime. So this is how it is being implemented. To make sure that everything is fine. Yeah. So this is the project, and these remember the fourth step is the applying the EVL constraints. So these are the EVL constraints. These are like object constraint language OCL constraints. These are basically in the Epsilon modeling framework. So I have basically used EVL constraints to perform that last process. So this is the last process. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to apply that the plugin. So if you go ahead and you apply that, it's called code to implementation model and aspect oriented pattern detection transformation. So this is basically applying the plugin. So I'm going to, I've applied and it's worked, and now I'm going to deactivate that. As a result of that, you will be able to find out an instance of a language. Now it is being able to identify patterns. It is being able to identify the Java class, because it's a Java class, and then there are packages. These are the Java classes, all of them Java classes, and these are the patterns that have been identified. So if you see here, they require is being able to identify that there is a required activation pattern between M1 and M2, and then also it is being able to identify a pattern between runtime excluded activation pattern between M2 and 4. So these are, and the rest of them are also there. The next step that I'm going to perform is the manual step, like specify runtime feature dependency. There are two. A product line engineer can take another way, or we can perform the fourth step as a guidance step. So for instance, if I apply these constraints straight away, it will enable the product line engineer to find out, okay, these are the kind of dependencies that are being implemented in the source code by the developer. So it says, what essentially says is that you have to specify the concurrent activation between feature M5 and M1, because it's been identified here. Like I said, M1 and M5 is a concurrent activation. So if let's see, it's been identified, M5 and M1. Now this is one way of going. Now, but if the product line engineer wants to follow the other way around, he needs to specify. What I'm going to do is I'm going to specify the feature model, like the DOFM language. So essentially it's a feature model. I just name it feature model. So let's say it's called demo project FM, and it says so these are the basic attributes that need to be set. So to make sure that everything is fine. Now now I start specifying with the features. So if you remember, I've showed you that the features are like your M1, M2, M3. So I'm going to do one at the moment. So I'm going to, so the second is feature package trace. So feature package trace says that where the feature is residing. So is the package where the feature is residing. And what is the component that is implementing that? So it's the Java class that is implementing the M1. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to specify all of them, and I'll come back to you to show that how I specify the runtime feature dependencies accordingly. So now if you see that I've specified all of the features M1, M2, M3, M4, M5 and the rest of that. So these are the features that have been specified, and there are links in there. So what is essentially it is doing, it is connecting the DOFM, the instance, to the implementation model. So we all have like I said, we have all the models now, like the DOFM, the dependency oriented feature model, which I have said feature model here, with the specification. Now the next step is to specify the runtime feature dependencies. Like another it's just interchange of the name. So sometimes I use included activation, sometimes I've used required activation, but both are similar. So when I go ahead and I would like to specify the runtime included activation, I'm going to have a set of attributes that needs to be set in order to complete the specification. So what I have here is that I know that there is a specification between M1 and M2. There is a dependency being implemented between M1 and M2. So M1 required activation M2. So, and then it has where this is residing. It is residing in the package, and now what component it is being implemented is M1 required activation M2, just naming convention here. So essentially, if you remember, when I applied this pattern analysis event constraints, it says that there are 4 patterns that are being identified, and you have to specify all of them. Now since I have specified the runtime required activation, so this marker for that particular kind of dependency is gone. So I would like to let you know that there are 2 levels of inconsistencies that are being checked. One is to deal with the specification incompleteness, which is more like a structural inconsistencies, and the other ones are more to do with the behavioral inconsistencies. So just to start with structural inconsistency, and kind of you can say structural inconsistency is that you this specification is incomplete. So there are no targets being specified. So what essentially is going to give me an error by applying this. So what these are the so what essentially is saying is that the target for target feature not specified in M1 required activation M2, which is this one. So it is pointing me towards that particular kind of dependency specification. So now next thing is that I'm going to specify the feature. So now if I say it should go away. So that kind of dependency, and these are the ones. So the next step is to get rid of them. So I'm going to specify all of them to make sure that rest of them everything is specified in the right manner before we would go ahead and start discussing the type of inconsistencies that this particular prototype is being able to identify. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to specify the rest of them accordingly. Now I basically have specified all of the dependencies with all of the features. So the next thing is that when I apply this pattern analysis constraints, it says everything is fine. Now the next kind of inconsistency or structural inconsistency could be that the source and the target of a particular kind of runtime feature should not be equal. So for instance, a situation can arise where the product line engineer says, okay, it's between yes, a mistake, structural mistake that he has done, saying M1 is a source and M2 is M1 is a target. So this kind of inconsistency will be identified. So it says feature model level specification says M1 source is your M1, target is M1, and whereas the pattern model, which is runtime required activation, here it says that it's been implemented between M1 and M2. Now this is, and also related to that, a marker would say specified source should not be equal to the target. Please revise this. So a behavior cannot be implemented in the same feature. So this is another marker related to this marker saying, okay, you have to revise that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to revise that to make sure that the inconsistency is resolved. So just to make sure everything is fine, go ahead, I reapply that and it should go away. Now another kind of structural inconsistency could be that the specification is missing certain parts. For instance, it says, okay, now I heard there is no implementation available, or there is no you can say there is no link to that particular implementation being done. So essentially what I have done is I have actually removed the link here. So what we have here is that when I reapply that, it will give me these three interrelated markers. For instance, feature component trace for this M1 required activation dependency, M2 is not present, and the trace needs to the implementation model component is not, which is your aspect before, or which is the aspect that is implementing that, is not present. And related to that, because specification is not complete, it says please specify required activation between the source feature M1 and M2. So these three are interrelated to each other in some form. So I'm going to resolve that, and we are going to discuss more of the behavior inconsistencies, which are the core of the important work that we. So now just to start with, I go ahead and let's reverse the behavior. Let's reverse the specification behavior. Let's say it's between M2 and M1. So essentially what has happened is that it's not between M1 and M2 in a form that a source is M1 and so a target is M2, whereas it has reversed that. Now I'm going to save that, I'm going to reapply that. It should give an error marker. So now if we carefully see, we say it's the error markers are saying the feature model level or specification is saying that the source is M2 and the target is M1, whereas the pattern model says the source is M1 and the target is M2. Please check the implementation. So gives a hint, it gives that which implementation needs to be checked, and at the same time related to that, it is also saying that the specified pattern M12 is implemented in a reverse order. So, and also what does that mean? It means the specified dependency target is equal to the identified pattern source, and the specified dependency source is equal to. So this is kind of one kind of behavioral inconsistency that is being dealt with. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to resolve that by fixing the issue. So just to make sure that it's being resolved in a correct manner. So this when I reapply this, it is gone. Now another kind of inconsistency that can occur is that he has specified that between let's say M5 and M2. So what is essentially your source is M5 and your target is M2. So let's go ahead, let's see what this gives. So what does it say? It says that the feature model specification that the product line engineer, you have specified is between M5 and M2, with the pattern model says M1 and 5. Please check the implementation of that. So this is another kind of behavioral inconsistency that can be checked. So just to make sure that is correct, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to resolve that based on the markers that have been generated. Now another kind of behavior inconsistency could be that, okay, now the product line engineer go ahead and say, okay, now just accidentally just says, okay, now it's between M2 and M4, and now as a condition is going to do that. I'm just changing few things here. I'm just changing, okay, now he's just linked this pattern to that and that kind of a thing, that identified pattern. So I'm going to go ahead and make few changes related to the behavior, and you'll be able to find out what kind of errors that he is going to get. Now for instance, when I say when I click this, I have actually linked the aspect M2 to M4 excluded activation to required activation, which is wrong, which is not correct. At the same time, what I have done is I've changed this to, and I've say, okay, now it's been implemented. Now if we carefully see that the markers, it says contradiction between specified implementation dependency types. So what we have is that you have said that, okay, it's been runtime required activation or included activation, whereas the pattern model is different, and related to that is dissimilar aspects implementing dependencies in that. So feature model is saying at the feature model what you have linked is M2 exclude activation M4, whereas pattern model says it should be M1 required activation M2. And similarly with the same with the other one, so required, so at the feature model you say required activation, and the pattern model says runtime excluded activation. So related to that, there is a dissimilar aspect implementation dependency in this specification. Feature model says that required activation M1 required activation M2, whereas pattern model says it is different. So based on that, I'm going to change, and I'm going to make sure that it is fixed. So based on the markers, I go ahead and I change the ones. So I'm going to replace that, so it should go away, and the one, this one. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to fix this. So now when I apply EV constraints, then it should go away. Yeah, so it's gone. So these are the kinds of behavior inconsistencies that can be checked. So like I said, one is that there is no implementation being present. The other one is like if the is between you cannot specify the behavior in the same feature like I've done between M1 and M1. It is not right to do that in that way. And the third one that I have is between M5 and M1, where it's been identified between M1 and M2, the required activation one. The next step that I'm going to perform is to check the feasibility of the pattern detection algorithms. For instance, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to break few patterns and pattern implementations. I'm going to break the runtime required activation. Just clean that, make sure that everything's fine. Now I've actually broken the pattern, so this is no longer a pattern. So what will happen? Essentially, ideally, the plugin won't be able to identify this required activation pattern between M1 and M2 anymore. So I'm going to delete this instance, and I'm going to I'm going to clean the project, and I'm going to rerun the run space, and I'm going to come back to you in a minute. So I have cleaned the space, I have rerun the runtime environment. Now I am just to make sure that there are no bugs or everything is fine. So I'm going to, like I said, I've broken the pattern. So what I've actually broken is that the variable called source is no longer being set for the required activation pattern. So if you see, there were two S1 interface source and S2 interface target. So like source is not present, so this should not be a pattern. This is not a complete behavior. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rerun, and let's see what happens. Now I have actually applied this, and I've let's see. Now if we see here, remember there were 4 patterns being identified. Now there are only 3 remaining. So runtime required activation, runtime the concurrent activation, and the sequential activation. There are no more runtime required activation pattern. So this is essentially to show that the patterns are identified in the right manner. And also I would like to tell you that this process is the second process and the fourth process, like you have seen that I've specified the runtime feature dependencies, and I've integrated the dependency oriented feature model, which is the feature model here manually. So hopefully I have given enough information for evaluation. Thank you very much for watching the video, and thank you.